Did you know you are physically adapting to all your swiping, scrolling, and tapping?
We're changing our bodies and what they're able to do through our habits.
NPR's Body Electric, a special interactive series investigating how to fix the relationship between our tech and our health. Listen in the TED Radio Hour feed wherever you get your podcasts.
As the first week of a fourth special session draws to a close, the Senate passes a voucher-like plan for education. More today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Other stories we're tracking: a teacher shortage and what a new study tells us about the implications of past plans to bring in and retain teachers in Texas classrooms. The independent market monitor for the Texas power grid steps down after blowing the whistle on what she claims were artificially inflated energy prices. Texas's once red-hot housing market has lost a lot of sizzle, yet many struggle to get a house of their own. A closer look at what's happening. Plus, the week in politics with the Texas Tribune and a whole lot more when the Texas Standard gets started, right after this. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 10th day of November. I'm David Brown. Great to have you with us. And in case you missed it, we're now in round 4 of a special session at the Capitol. Governor Abbott calling lawmakers back to pass a bill for what he calls education savings accounts. Last night, the Texas Senate passed its version of the proposal, a controversial voucher-like plan that would give families public funds to pay for private school tuition and other education expenses. We'll hear more in the Texas News Roundup later in the program. This is not the first time a voucher-like plan has been taken up by Texas lawmakers over the years. Indeed, looking back at education issues, you start to notice some patterns. Back in the early 2000s, Texas was dealing with a problem that we're wrestling with again today: teacher shortages. Back then, one of the ways state officials decided to address this was by lowering the educational requirements needed to become a licensed teacher. Traditionally, people in Texas have gained their teaching credentials through 4-year universities or alternative certification programs. After the new rules went into effect, those alternative certification programs took less time to complete, making entering the profession a more attractive proposition. Well, today, the majority of teachers starting their careers in Texas are alternatively licensed. That according to new research co-authored by Sarah Guthrie, an associate professor of educational administration at the University of Oklahoma. And she joins us now to tell us more about why Texas implemented the rule changes, how they've changed the profession, and how all this relates to teacher pay. Professor Guthrie, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you for having me.
Your research mentions that in the 2000s, Texas made it easier to become a teacher. Can you tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that decision?
Yeah, at the time, Texas, like most states, had persistent teacher shortage in several areas of education, including math, computers, science, teachers of foreign language, and bilingual. And there had long been a prevailing thought that traditional schools of higher education were actually the bottleneck. And if we could just make teachers faster and ideally cheaper, we would not have this shortage.
Well, after the rule changes, alternative licensing programs took off as a way of entering the teaching profession. Why are fewer people choosing to become teachers through traditional 4-year degrees? I presume because these alternative programs are easier?
I would definitely say quicker and less expensive. The new licensing programs are allowed to be standalone entities, so they can be online, for profit, even through a district. And then finally, traditional schools of higher ed started creating their own as well.
Now, your research suggests that these changes had an effect on teacher pay in Texas. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so we looked at what happened over time as districts who switched to hiring more alternatively certified teachers started paying less. And we found that districts which hire the most alternatively certified new teachers do pay about 13% less for new teachers. And they also end up hiring about 30% more new teachers than the districts in the lowest quartile of hiring alternatively licensed teachers.
So we're now 2 decades past this initial change. and it's my understanding that roughly half of all new teachers are alternatively licensed. Has this had any measurable impact on student performance?
That's a great question. That is one that's hard to disentangle because alternatively licensed teachers do tend to get hired in the most challenging context. And so it's hard to disentangle. Is it people who are going into that, or the context in which they're going into, or the training or lack thereof they received on the way?
I want to read one of the findings from your research. Alternative licensure has also increased some dimensions of diversity in the teaching field. Could you say more about that?
Yeah. So other studies have found that when states increase barriers to licensure, they actually decrease the diversity in their field and the new teachers coming in. And our study finds the opposite, that by making the teaching license more accessible, easier to obtain, and cheaper, that there is an increase in diversity in who obtains that license, which is a good thing.
Well, what do you think accounts for that discrepancy?
I would say, in general, we know that there's some sorting that goes on for people who are traditionally performing lower on standardized tests, which do happen to be minority candidates. Also, we know that the alternative licensure programs just in general are more appealing to men, which at a time when education is predominantly staffed by women, increasing the number of men in the field is also a really desirable thing.
Now, something that we should address directly is the fact that here in Texas, certainly, we have large teacher shortages right now. What impact do you think changing the requirements for licensing teachers has had on the problem that we currently see today? Would it have been a whole lot worse if these programs had not been instituted, or how do you see it?
Well, in many ways, we're back to where we started. However, we've learned some really important lessons along the way. And this study does illustrate that just focusing on the point of production and making new teachers has not addressed the area of shortage. But we have illustrated that the manipulation of policies do have an impact on how many people are becoming a teacher. But we've also illustrated that really it's not the traditional schools of education that are the bottleneck in attracting people.
What is?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, I almost might argue that we're a little bit worse off after this policy because we did produce thousands of newly licensed people who did want to be a teacher, who did get a job in school and show up, and now they've left the profession. And Texas is still left with the same teacher shortage in the same areas that we've been reporting since the 1990s.
So the issue has shifted perhaps from one of recruitment to one of retention. Do I understand you saying that?
I would say while I can't say the policy solution, I can say from what we've learned experimenting with policies on production, that alone, we have not been able to make enough teachers. We do have higher turnover in alternatively licensed teachers. And so districts which have shifted heavily to hiring alternatively licensed teachers are hiring more and more new teachers every year at less pay.
I know that finding a solution to the issue of a teacher shortage was really beyond the scope of your research, but you've been studying this for some time. What is your sense of why this is happening and what solutions might be available for policymakers?
I would say, in my opinion, drawing people to the profession, we've now proven through this policy is possible. And there are thousands of people who are willing to be a teacher. However, sometime between the point of licensure and their first few years on the job, it becomes untenable. And so I think policy and research would benefit from focusing on that point where we're losing the people who really wanted to be there from the schools who really needed them.
I'm just going to say it out loud. Teacher pay?
That would be my next policy trial, if I had to suggest one, would be I don't think it would hurt to try and see that as a possible policy solution.
Well, is it possible that when a teacher enters the profession that a confluence of, well, certainly right now, inflation, how the school settings have changed, having perhaps a lack of support as more and more teachers do leave the profession, whether it all sort of combines into a sort of perfect storm for public schools?
Yeah, I think you summarized it nicely. It's without a doubt one of the most challenging times to be in education for a variety of reasons. And at the same time, to have pay falling and really challenging curriculum in math and science and other STEM fields to stay competitive. We're demanding a higher skill set that we need from teachers, and just the three are not meshing.
Sarah Guthrie is an associate professor of educational administration at the University of Oklahoma who's co-authored some new research about teaching licenses in Texas. We'll have a link to more resources at texasstandard.org. Professor, thank you so much for talking with us on The Standard.
Thank you so much.
Let's turn now to Wells Dunbar, social media editor, and find out what he's seeing online as he monitors what Texans are talking about. Hello there, Wells.
Hi, David. Good to be with you. And as you noted, it's round 4 in the Texas legislature, and critics accusing the Texas Senate of playing fast and loose with the rules. To wit, the upper chamber voting to suspend standard rules and hold committee hearings with little advance notice to act on bills, including school vouchers and immigration. On that topic, Senate Bill 4 creates a state crime for unauthorized entry into Texas from a foreign country. Opponents call it unconstitutional, or as Tyler Malloy puts it on our Facebook page, quote, "If we can legislate that they're criminals for existing, we can incarcerate them on site." Tyler calling that legislation draconian. Meanwhile, John Nielsen, also via Facebook, says flooding what little jail and prison space remaining with nonviolent offenders doesn't seem well thought out. Reactions there to Senate Bill 4. They're heading to the full Senate chamber, I believe. That's just one story we're watching heading into the weekend here, David. I'll be back with more later in the program.
Indeed, we're going to have more on what's happening there at the Texas Ledge at the bottom of this hour, the 30-minute mark, halfway through the program. Coming up, we're going to be talking about what's happening in the housing market. If you're a buyer or a seller or a would-be buyer or seller, you're going to want to stick around for that. It's a whole lot more of the Texas Standard just ahead. Stay with us.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Oncology, helping patients fight lung cancer through new detection methods and medical treatments, and local clinical trials that allow researchers and patients to improve survivorship in Texas. More at texasoncology.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Carrie Bivens is stepping down from the position of independent market monitor for the Texas power grid. Bivens has served as a kind of third-party auditor for the Texas energy market since 2020. And Mose Buchele of KUT in Austin reports that her resignation comes after a clash with officials over what she called artificially inflated energy prices.
In September, Bivens presented a report to the Electric Reliability Council of Texas saying that a policy aimed at boosting grid reliability had squeezed the energy market and artificially raised the cost of electricity by $8 billion over the summer. ERCOT CEO Pablo Vegas took umbrage with that in a meeting, saying the numbers had been misinterpreted. Bivens stuck to her guns, insisting that the cost was real and the policy had added no extra benefit to reliability. Her departure is sure to increase speculation that ERCOT and other officials want to curtail the powers of the market monitor. Bivens' contract was already set to expire in mid-December, and the state is accepting proposals to fill the position. I'm Mose Buchele in Austin.
Support for coverage of business comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a safety-focused workers' comp provider, celebrating 25 years of its dividend program. More at texasmutual.com/dividends.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Well, buying and selling a house in many parts of Texas looks very different than it did just 2 years ago. Gone are the days when someone selling their house got dozens of offers. And this change is particularly notable in the Texas capital city, when people hoping to buy had to bid tens of thousands of dollars more just to compete with other offers. Now, things are, well, I'll let KUT's Audrey McGlinchey explain.
Lindsay Mader and her husband put their North Austin home up for sale in May. Then they waited.
The weeks just kept passing by, and we were like, what is going on?
Hardly anyone came to see the house. No one offered to buy it.
And then the months kept passing by, and it was really like, what's going on?
So Mader and her realtor did something virtually unheard of in Austin just 2 years ago. They lowered the price. Then they lowered it again. After several months, someone finally bid. They got an offer for $100,000 below the asking price. Disappointed and also kind of confused, Mader and her husband decided to take it.
We knew that the market was nowhere what it used to be, but I don't think we were adequately prepared, or maybe we were in denial just about like how bad it was going to be.
During the pandemic, the housing market in Austin was, well, wild. Mortgage interest rates were low, about 2-3%, so more people could afford to buy a house. At the same time, remote workers were moving to the city. Suddenly, there were a bunch of people clamoring for homes. Prices rose 30% year over year. It was a frenzy.
Nonstop, wall-to-wall showings.
She called me and there were 19 offers.
We were literally up against 93 offers on one house. On one house, yes, on one house.
The offer that we went with was $100,000 over asking price. Like I said, I thought they were nuts.
And it was cash. It was a cash offer, $615 cash.
And then in the spring of 2022, mortgage interest rates began to rise. 4, 5, 6, 7%.
That's right. The average for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage rose to 7.57%. That's according to a Freddie.
Suddenly, buying a house was a lot more expensive, and home prices began to fall. It was taking weeks, months, instead of 1 week for a house to sell. Soccer Chapman Thomas is a realtor in the Austin area.
Now it is what those of us with real estate experience call a normal market. A buyer can go and look at a house today, Friday, and think about it over the weekend, and probably on Monday make an offer.
Austin had for a decade been what people call a seller's market. The seller had a lot of power. They could expect to get the price they were asking. That's not really true any longer, and it's certainly not the quick cash market it was just recently.
Everybody forgets the average appreciation for housing per year is between 5 to 8%. That's it. Not 43, not 27, not, 66%. That's not normal.
This summer, the median sales price of a home in Austin fell 3%. Rising mortgage interest rates have affected sales across the country, but prices are starting to go back up in many cities: Philadelphia, San Diego, Boston. Yet in Austin, home prices are still falling. Why is that?
Austin is a market that grew too fast for its own good.
Allie Wolf is a senior economist at a real estate research firm called Zonda. She says people continue to move to Austin. The city's got a strong economy, low unemployment. So again, why are home prices still falling here when in other places they've started going back up?
Right now, home prices and incomes are not fully aligned.
Basically, most people in the city don't make enough to afford to buy a house, especially not with higher interest rates. Which brings me to this last point. Prices have come down, but not enough to offset the cost of higher interest rates. So buying a house is actually more expensive than, well, when prices were climbing so quickly. By one estimate, a household would need to earn just over $150,000 a year to buy a house in Austin.
Austin has faced a more extreme housing affordability crunch. So even though the fundamentals say that Austin's housing market should be a lot stronger than it is, buyers have a limit.
Hi, how are you?
Chinea Enema moved to Austin from Madison, Wisconsin last year. She rented an apartment at first, and then she started thinking about buying a house, hopefully where she could have a separate office.
My apartment, I had my desk in my bedroom, and I really didn't love that.
Enema found a 3-bedroom home in far north Austin, not too far from Pflugerville. She bid $10,000 less than the asking price and got it. She moved in at the end of September. She likes the place, but says she's still stomaching her 7% interest rate.
I asked my mortgage company for the breakdown for my monthly payments, what's actually interest versus what's my principal. And my interest rate is 3 times the amount of my principals.
Enema says she doesn't regret buying a house, but it cost a lot more than she expected. And it's made her question how we talk about homeownership in this country as this ultimate goal, as the only way to reliably build wealth.
When people say that buying a home is the American dream, it really isn't. Buying a home costs a lot of money. I'm glad I purchased a home because I wanted more space, but it also is a costly investment, and I don't think necessarily buying a home is the right move for everyone, especially with interest rates so high.
Real estate experts hate speculating. So do I. But no one seems to think that mortgage rates will come down, certainly not to where they were 2 years ago, which means prices will have to fall further to make buying a house in Austin more affordable. I'm Audrey McGlinchey in Austin.
We are fast approaching 29 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. And coming up, we're going to be checking in with the news desk for the Texas News Roundup, a quick overview of what's happening across the Lone Star State on this Friday before Veterans Day. Stick around. There's a whole lot more of the Standard just ahead. Stay with us.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Enel North America, generating renewable energy with projects run by and for Texans, investing in the future of local communities, schools, and small businesses. Learn more at enelnorthamerica.com/Texas.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Thomas. Texas lawmakers are in the midst of their 4th special session of the year, and they aren't wasting any time moving forward on big legislation. Last night, the Texas Senate passed its proposal creating education savings accounts, a voucher-like program that gives families public funds to pay for private school. KERA's Bill Ziebel reports on the hours of testimony that took place in front of the House panel.
From Thursday morning to well past sundown, lawmakers heard from dozens of Texans. They came to the Capitol to weigh in for and against ESAs. Among them, H.D. Chambers, speaking on behalf of school districts opposed to voucher-like programs. Republican Representative Ken King asked Chambers if he'd change his mind about House Bill 1, considering it would also increase public school funding.
Are we going to get to a place that we're going to pass something? And if all schools ever say is no, is that worse for public schools? Because we just had a robust discussion about how underfunded you are now.
Who blinks, right? Right now, we're not blinking.
Governor Greg Abbott has been pushing for ESAs all year, saying they'll empower parents to make the best education choices for their kids. But most Democrats and some rural Texas Republicans are not convinced. I'm Bill Ziebel in Dallas.
The Texas Senate passed two pieces of legislation Thursday that would expand immigration enforcement in the state. Senate Bill 3 allocates $1.5 billion for a border wall. Senate Bill 4 makes illegal entry into Texas a state crime. Brent Ray Brewer was executed by the state of Texas last night. He was convicted of a 1990 Amarillo murder and robbery. Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies reports.
As he faced his execution, Brewer's final words expressed remorse for the murder of Bob Laminack. "I hope you find peace," were his final words, according to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Thursday afternoon, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Brewer's final appeal, claiming he was sent to death row based on the junk science testimony of a discredited psychiatrist. The next TDCJ execution is scheduled for November 16th for David Santiago Renteria for the 2001 killing of a 5-year-old girl that he kidnapped from an El Paso Walmart. In San Antonio, I'm David Martin Davies.
A Dallas man who shot and killed two workers at Methodist Dallas Medical Center last year has been convicted of capital murder. Nestor Hernandez will spend the rest of his life in prison for their deaths. I'm Matt Thomas from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Aspire Allergy and Sinus, providing same-day results and custom treatment plans to tackle allergies at the root of the problem. Over 40 locations throughout Texas. More info at aspireallergy.com.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. We're already familiar with vector-borne diseases in Texas. These are illnesses you can get from pests like mosquitoes or ticks. Think the Zika virus or Lyme disease. Not only are these afflictions on the rise, however, researchers are also seeing diseases thought to be uncommon in Texas, like dengue fever, bubonic plague. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently committed $8 million to a program designed to fight vector-borne diseases in Texas and the Gulf Coast. For more, we're joined now by one of the program's leaders, Janet Hurley, Integrated Pest Management Specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Ms. Hurley, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Well, thank you for having me today.
What's behind this increase in cases and types of vector-borne diseases?
I think it's just mostly an increase in people traveling and insects doing their thing, and then it's just a matter of nature. But yes, we are seeing increased numbers, especially with West Nile virus.
Can you give us some examples of some of the diseases that have started to pop up here? You mentioned West Nile virus. What else?
Well, like you said in the intro, dengue, that has showed up. The U.S. cases of malaria that we have seen. I mean, that's an old world disease that we're now seeing again. Even Western equine encephalitis, something even else that most people aren't aware of, murine typhus, which is a flea-borne illness.
You know, I think that a lot of folks, you mentioned travel, and at least historically, ports of entry have been places where it seems that some of these vector-borne diseases have come into Texas, at least. I'm curious as to what you were hearing from the Centers for Disease Control when they decided to make this commitment to study what's happening in Texas and the Gulf Coast.
Well, their commitment has to go to making those that have an influence on behavior aware of what needs to happen. I mean, we've always talked about, dumping water for mosquitoes, but we don't do a whole lot on fly management or mites or ticks, and they are all interrelated. Our outreach is to help educate not just, say, the person who is doing the vector control, but maybe the sanitarians and the pest management professionals and all the other partners on why it is so important to look at sanitation and follow some of the other things like vegetation management and things that help us to keep, bad pests down, good pests up, but understanding that this does take a complete community to help us to not spread zoonotic diseases. We've done really good, but it took us a while on West Nile. We got a little bit more ramped up on Zika, on Chagas, but there's more and more coming.
Well, what about solutions? I mean, what solutions are on the table? And I would imagine they would extend beyond public information and awareness.
Well, and the solutions, they're changing. Solutions being, instead of doing adulticiding, doing the larviciding, cleaning up water. There are certain, for instance, there are certain breeds of mosquitoes. No matter what we do, we get flood waters. They're going to come out because that's the only time they come out. But knowing that and knowing, oh, this will only happen at this time, well, then you also can prepare. Oh, we're going to have a flooding event. This is what we need to do. My co-partner in this project is the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board. We're learning from them, but they had an event where they had a hurricane and they didn't have flooding to the point where it destroyed and brought in mosquitoes. It destroyed property. What ended up happening was all of the debris was piled up for weeks. It brought rats, which brought flies. Which brought, it was something else that they ended up having to deal with. So these are the things we're starting to look at, because I can tell you, I'm always watching the next weather event to see, is it going to trigger something different?
So it's about getting ahead of it and not dealing with the ramifications after the fact.
Yes, because my background, as you said, was integrated pest management. I've been working with the schools for 20 some odd years, helping them understand this philosophy of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
Rather than react, let us be proactive.
Janet Hurley is Integrated Pest Management Specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. You can find out more about the new Vector program over at texasstandard.org. We'll have links to more. Ms. Hurley, thanks again for speaking with us.
You're quite welcome. Have a wonderful week.
All right, coming up on 39 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. There's a whole lot more of the Standard just ahead, including a look at one of the veterans we salute as heroes.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Oncology, helping patients fight lung cancer through new detection methods and medical treatments, and local clinical trials that allow researchers and patients to improve survivorship in Texas. More at texasoncology.com.
Hi, my name is Stacy Hallman. I'm the Senior Vice President of Arts and Entertainment for IMG Events. I am honored to lead the team that is bringing the first inaugural Honeyland Festival to Sugar Land, Texas, and Houston this year, 2023. One of the things that the pandemic taught us is if you build something that is experiential, engaging, and unique, everyone will come. And so our target audience is certainly, African Americans, Black people, people of color, who love food and music and a culinary experience overall. But we welcome everyone. Yes, Mary J. Blige is taking the stage on Sunday night, and I've been a fan of Mary J. Blige since I can remember. And all of the local artists like Toby Leeway, who has been our Houston ambassador, and the Houston All-Stars. That's going to be our hip-hop moment where we all get to just, swag and sway a little bit. So Scarface, Slim Thug, Paul Wall, Zero, Lil Kiki, and a couple more surprises are going to be added there, I've learned as well. Everything about Honeyland is like serendipity. When you think about honey, it is both sweet and delicious, but it's also a salve. And when we think about this audience and the community and the historical legacy of culinary with this audience, we understand that there is so much joy and so much sweetness in the storytelling, but there's also some medicine that we're, putting in the dessert, if you will. And with that, we thought about all of the promises and the triumphs of this audience. And we know that it felt like a reminder of this land of milk and honey. So we imagined a world that we felt like didn't exist, was full of celebration, full of sweetness, full of joy, and a reminder of that legacy and how much we have really, really overcome. Houston was so intentional for us in developing a destination for Honeyland. One, it's one of the top 5 culinary destinations in the country. There are are a significant number of Black-owned restaurants and Black-owned food experiences there. One of the first things I want to do is experience Bun B and Trill Burgers. You know, he's local to Houston. He's been one of our fan favorites. And every time I hear someone talk about Trill Burgers, it's like this juicy burger that I'm just like, I've got to forgo my non-beef eating and get into that. There's also Khalees, the fact that she's cooking a full-course dinner at our Farm to Feast experience on Saturday night. And, you know, things that I've never experienced before, like an Ethiopian coffee ceremony that Marcus Sanderson and Prince Lobo are going to do, and our Uncle Nearest cigar and whiskey bar, which is the fastest growing whiskey in the country. And with this audience, we know that it is a strong West African culture that is also in the Houston area. So we're celebrating all of that as a part of this experience and really bringing it to the center and making it an important part of the narrative of how culturally rich and diverse this area is, and why it's the perfect destination for us to mount our inaugural Honeyland experience. Honeyland Festival is this Saturday and Sunday, November 11th and 12th in Sugar Land, Texas, Crown Festival Park. This is Stacey Hallman. I can't wait to see you at Honeyland, and you are listening to the Texas Standard.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. In World War II, as the country battled to meet a growing demand for military pilots, a young airplane mechanic in San Antonio saw a chance and took it. In advance of Veterans Day on Saturday, Maggie Rivas Rodriguez brings us his story.
Leonard Vara Fuentes was born in Laredo in 1922, but grew up in San Antonio. He finished high school, and he became an airplane mechanic apprentice at the old Kelly Airfield in San Antonio.
I was attending that apprentice school in 1941, December 7th, and things changed from then on.
That was when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor.
But I finished my school. When I finished, I became a qualified aircraft mechanic.
His job as an airplane mechanic gave him a new perspective.
I was taught to start the engines, to taxi the airplanes we worked on and go park them over here and so forth. Not flying, just on the ground. But that was just enough to really motivate me to learn to fly.
He was in luck. John Curatola is a military historian at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Curatola says that the country's huge demand for airplanes required new criteria for pilots.
Most of your pilots before the war went to West Point, had a full 4-year college degree, or some kind of formal education above and beyond high school. But what you see here during the war with the need for manpower, we're willing to accept men who can score well in an aptitude test and even have, 1 year or 2 years worth of college.
The Army Air Corps, as it was known then, admitted Fuentes into its elite aviation cadet program.
I underwent exams, mental exams, learning ability exams, and physicals. And so they sent me to Texas A&M along with some others who had no degree. We were there 9 months. In those 9 months, we went to school Sundays and Saturdays and sometimes into the evening hours. They crammed us in 9 months, a 2-year education.
Then came flight school.
I took to flying. I loved it, and I'm not going to brag, but I was doing very well.
Doug Lantry, a historian at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Base in Ohio, put it like this.
Think of the training for a pilot as 3 sets of 9-week courses, so about 27 to 30 weeks. As time goes on for these trainees, the airplanes get faster and bigger and more complicated. And the things they have to do with the airplanes also get faster, bigger, and more complicated.
After all that training, Fuentes had another decision to make.
Do you want to fly multi-engine airplanes, such as bombers or cargo, or do you want to fly single-engine fighter planes? I chose fighter planes. And I remember that I was scared. I remember that my knees were shaking the first time I flew that airplane. It was such a powerful engine. I got to Europe in February of 1945. And assigned to the 87th Squadron of the 79th Fighter Group, which was in Italy. I got to fly 8 war missions where you went into the German territory. 8.
After Fuentes came home, there was one final flight.
The last mission that I flew while I was still in the Air Force, World War II, was a flight over New York City. The 101st Airborne Division and the 82nd Airborne Division, who were a pivotal part of the D-Day, were coming home. And we flew over New York, fairly low altitude. I just felt like these guys had really put a real effort. They had done something wonderful, and they should be honored.
Fuentes received an honorable discharge after World War II, but stayed in the reserves. He was activated again during the Korean War. He married, and he and his wife had 3 children. Leonard Fuentes passed away in 2009. For the Voces Oral History Center at UT Austin's Moody College of Communication, this is Maggie Rivas Rodriguez.
This is Sean Petrie with the Typewriter Rodeo, and we are a group of friends who type poems on the spot on whatever topics people want. Celebrating the positive. It can seem daunting, each headline you read, books banned at home, new wars overseas. Stories that disgust or bring tears to your eyes, the endless parade of political lies. It's enough to make you just tune it all out. Where once you were certain, now you're clouded with doubt. Perhaps what's needed is to just take a breath. The sun is still shining. There's still beauty left. You can still buy flowers. You can still give gifts. You can still smile back and give others a lift. Celebrate those jeans that fit you so well. Celebrate the rain. You never can tell. What will come next, love or disaster? You can stoop to the doom, but don't forget laughter. Yes, the sun is still shining, so take a deep breath. There's always bad news, and there's still beauty left. This is Sean Petrie, and you're on Texas Standard Time.
Hey, don't forget to send us your ideas for Typewriter Rodeo poems. Drop us a line on social media or through the Contact Us link at texasstandard.org. Friday means it's time for the week that was in Texas politics. Joining us, Matthew Watkins, managing editor for news and politics at the Texas Tribune. Matthew, welcome back.
Hey there.
Tuesday, Election Day here in Texas. Quite a few statewide proposals on the ballot this year, 14 in all. I think 13 passed, right?
That's right. 13 passed. The big headliner, of course, was a massive $18 billion property tax cut. That is something that, homeowners around the state will, very likely feel in their pockets. You're talking about a savings of around $100 a month for the average homeowner in Texas. That's an estimate, of course. But, another kind of collection of big ones that I think flew under the radar a little bit, which was a significant investment in infrastructure. We approved in Texas $1 billion for water infrastructure improvements, $1.5 billion for broadband infrastructure in rural areas and urban areas that are underserved by broadband, and around $5 billion for the electric grid, $1 billion for state parks. So, some kind of bread and butter issues voted on, getting widespread approval in the state as well.
What did not get approval?
Well, there was one that did not get approved. This was an initiative to raise the retirement age for judges, the mandatory retirement age, from 75 to 79. That passed by nearly a 2/3 vote against. A little bit surprising, but, when I started to think about it, there's a lot of people in Texas unhappy about the age of our president. I'm not sure if that factored in. Some people unhappy about the age of the possible challenger, and maybe just a general feeling in the state of, some of these kind of older politicians should kind of get out of the way and let the new generation come in.
Also on Tuesday, a fourth special session got underway. What's this one about?
Well, it's about a lot of the topics of the third special session,
Right.
School vouchers and border security. This week, the Senate took fast action, passing bills to appropriate $1.5 billion for the border wall that Texas is helping build, to make it illegal to, basically a state crime to cross the border illegally into Texas. And then there's the big voucher bill, which also passed the Senate. Those all go to the House. There's a big consensus in the House to take action on immigration. The question is vouchers. There will likely be a vote today on the voucher bill in a committee. 5 people in that committee have previously voted in favor of vouchers. They're going to need 3 people to flip in order to advance it into the full session and into the full chamber. And then we're going to see, right? There have never been the votes to pass vouchers in the House. Governor Greg Abbott hoping that will happen today or this month, but we will see whether he can get those votes in favor of it.
Those who followed the Ken Paxton impeachment trial may recognize the name Nate Paul back in the news. He's charged with 4 new federal crimes, right?
That's right. 4 new federal crimes. He has been indicted on, all for wire fraud. That's in addition to the 8 that he has already been charged with. None of these indictments mention Ken Paxton in any way, but of course it is interesting to see the FBI continue to poke around in that world. There's the question of whether he could be, incentivized to flip with these charges and maybe point the finger at Ken Paxton. We will see. So far, there's been no indication of that.
Read more about all these stories over at texastribune.org. That's where Matthew Watkins is managing editor for news and politics. Matthew, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.
And you were listening to the Texas Standard. I was just reading on the Texas Tribune's website, Texas House Committee advances school voucher bill, overcoming key hurdle. Apparently, that voucher-like plan from the governor about to get its first House floor vote. So interesting. Watch this space, as they say. But obviously, big news day. Wells, what are you seeing online out there?
Yeah, big news day indeed. Lots of ground to cover. Murphy McBride puts it, I think, in some words that many folks may empathize with. She says, "The news is so troubling at this time, I can barely stand to listen. War and corruption are in the headlines." But she notes that the fact that most of the propositions passed this election is heartening, since most supported positive actions. In her words, "There are good people doing good things, and I have to remember that always." I believe it was the proposition that passed the most handily is the one that Lauren Von Gundy Bland points out on our Facebook. She says, "Thank you to all the fellow Texans who voted yes on Proposition 9 to give retired school personnel a much-needed cost of living raise." But she knows the fight is not over. There are still many who did not receive a raise of any sort. I think they're referring to, to that school voucher bill and the fact that it has been tied to increased public education funding in general. As you noted, that legislation going to get a vetting here in the Texas House shortly. Interesting, it's just interesting to think about the timing with this fourth special session. It really feels like lawmakers under the gun, and I think I saw someone on X, formerly Twitter, note that Thanksgiving is the real wild card here. I think a lot of folks really want to pack it in there. It seems like it's coming kind of early this year, so many Texas legislators keeping that in mind there. Speaking of educators, Shawnee Dempsey says this about the story at the top of the show. She notes that I know several teachers who chose alternative certification. These are educated adults who discover a passion for teaching after starting alternate careers. She says that the bigger issue lies with school districts who need to do a better job of supporting new teachers, regardless of which path they take to the classroom. Teaching is demanding, and teachers need mentors, coaches, and administrators who have their backs. Lots of educational issues in play here, obviously, in this fourth legislative session. But going back all the way to the first there. Oh my gosh, when was that? January, February? Who's keeping track?
We're trying to. That's for doggone sure. Wells Dunbar's keeping track of what Texans are talking about online. Keep your comments coming to him. We got a weekend ahead of us, and you keep up with the news 24/7 over at texasstandard.org. Our producers and reporters include Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Kristen Cabrera, Alexander Hart, Michael Marks, Gloria Martinez, and Sean Saldana. Raul Alonso is our digital producer. On behalf of the entire Texas Standard team, I'm David Brown, wishing you a happy Veterans Day.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family. Would your company or organization like to be a sponsor as well? Contact your local station for opportunities within your community. For statewide sponsorships, visit TexasPublicMediaNetwork.com.
You've been listening to the Texas Standard. Texas Standard and KUT Public Radio are members of the NPR network. It's an independent coalition of public media podcasters. You can find a lot more great content and shows like the Texas Standard in the NPR network, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Did you know you are physically adapting to all your swiping, scrolling, and tapping?
We're changing our bodies and what they're able to do through our habits.
NPR's Body Electric, a special interactive series investigating how to fix the relationship between our tech and our health. Listen in the TED Radio Hour feed wherever you get your podcasts.